Do you struggle with feelings of guilt or regret for things that you have done in the past? Or maybe you struggle with chronic feelings of not enoughness, feeling less than, not good enough, not worthy or important. Today we're going to talk about the differences between guilt and shame, and we're going to talk about some strategies to help you with both. Hi, if you are new to my channel, my name is Dr. Lori Bruce. I'm a clinical psychologist and mindfulness coach and host of the podcast From Both Sides of the Couch, where I talk about all things related to mental health from both the perspective of a psychologist as well as a client in my own therapy. Today, we're going to dive into the painful world of guilt and shame. I personally think shame is one of the most painful emotions that humans can experience. I also personally have struggled with both of these emotions. But although sometimes people use these terms interchangeably, guilt and shame are actually different emotions. To put it very simply in the most basic of terms, guilt is the emotion that we have when we believe that we have done something wrong, and shame is the emotion that we feel when we feel we are wrong, that we are broken or flawed. Let's start with guilt. Guilt is a necessary emotion in order for a society to function. Think about it. If people did bad things and didn't feel guilty about it, that's not a society that is sustainable or that I personally would want to live in. Guilt is a necessary emotion for us to learn, I did a bad thing and I don't want to do that again. So it's an emotion that stops us from doing bad things when we can imagine in the future, oh, I would feel bad about that. I would feel guilty for having done that. People who do not have the capacity to feel guilt are called psychopaths. A psychopath is someone who will do a bad thing and not feel any guilt about it, and sometimes might even feel some joy or pleasure around that. We cannot have a society full of psychopaths, obviously. So in general, I want you to think of guilt as actually a necessary emotion. Even though it feels yucky when we experience it, it is a necessary emotion for us to have. However, what if you're feeling guilty and you actually haven't done anything wrong? For example, let's take my client who I will call Sarah, which is not her real name. But Sarah is one of the nicest, kindest people you will ever meet. She's always thinking about what other people need, what other people want, and she is a self-admitted people pleaser. She wants people to like her, and so she is very generous and does a lot of nice things for other people. So, as you would expect, Sarah has a lot of friends. She has a lot of people in her life who care about her, and she is always ready and able to help. If you ever want to ask her for a favor, almost instinctively, Sarah will say yes. However, as you can also imagine, Sarah sometimes feels burned out. She feels tired. She's always giving to others. That's part of her profession of taking care of others. But even outside of her work hours, she's taking care of her children. She's taking care of her spouse. She takes care of her friends. And although that's a huge part of her identity is being a caregiver, she is not very skillful at taking care of herself, and she's not very skillful at setting boundaries. So when Sarah first came into me for this feeling of being tired and burned out, starting to feel a little irritable, which is not like her, she was feeling a tremendous amount of guilt about how she's not wanting to do things for other people. She feels like that's bad and feeling a lot of shame, like that's saying something negative about who she is as a human being. Sarah noticed that she feels guilty all the time. She feels guilty when she even thinks about saying no to a request or setting a boundary in her life. This is an example of what I would call inappropriate guilt. We feel guilty for things when we're actually not doing anything wrong. When we feel guilty for things that we've actually done wrong, we can call that appropriate guilt. Inappropriate guilt, the guilt we feel when we haven't done anything wrong, is usually based on messages that we've gotten in childhood or beliefs that we've developed over the years, and they are false beliefs. So the belief, if I take care of myself, that means I'm being selfish, and you feel guilty when you try to take care of yourself, that's an example of inappropriate guilt. And she probably learned those messages in childhood, got reinforced for chronically taking care of other people, and possibly even some form of punishment, emotional punishment, for when she tried to take care of herself. So she learned at a very early age, I'm going to get affection, I'm going to get attention, I'm going to get positive things from always taking care of other people, and I'm going to get negative things, pushback, criticism, emotional or withdrawal of affection when I try to take care of myself. Sometimes it's really difficult to ascertain, is my guilt appropriate or inappropriate? So, how can you tell? One way is to ask yourself, if my friend were in this situation, if my best friend, someone that I care about and I want the best for them, if they were in this situation, would you encourage them to feel guilty or not? Sometimes when we take our situation outside of ourselves and imagine it on a friend or someone else, it becomes a lot more clear. It's so much harder when we're trying to think about it for ourselves because we're loaded with all those old messages and all that baggage about ourselves. But it's much easier to extend compassion and have more clarity when we imagine it in someone else. So how do you overcome appropriate guilt? Again, the guilt we feel when we know we've actually done something wrong. In DBT, we talk about this concept of a repair. When we have done something wrong, when we have done something that goes against our own values or our own moral code, and we feel guilty about that, it's appropriate to offer a repair. We may not be able to fix the problem that we've created. Oftentimes, it's not possible to fix something that we have done. However, that doesn't mean that we can't attempt to repair the relationship, repair the trust maybe that has been broken, or offer some kind of restitution or acknowledgement that you have made a mistake. A repair is both verbal and behavioral. So the first half is acknowledging to the person, I'm sorry, and this is the mistake I did. And then the behavioral component, you can get creative here. If there's something that you actually can fix or undo, then do that. But if you can't undo it or fix it, then maybe you could offer some kindness, some favor, or some other way to give back to that person. So here's a small example. Back in the day when my kids were younger and they went to daycare, I worked very hard to get to the daycare to pick them up on time. One time, There was a miscommunication between my kid's dad and I, and we each thought that the other was going to pick up the kids. And so by the time I got to the daycare, it was probably 30 minutes or so after they had closed, which meant that a teacher needed to stay after work an extra 30 minutes in order to wait for me. I felt understandably guilty about that. I did something wrong because of my mistake. A teacher needed to stay late. So a repair in that situation was verbally acknowledging to the teacher, I am so sorry. I recognize that you stayed late on your already long work day because I made the mistake of coming late. So I'm so sorry, and I appreciate your taking care of my kids after hours. So that's the verbal component of a repair. And then the behavioral component of a repair, I brought some cookies in the next day specifically for the teacher to say thank you again and acknowledging my mistake. A part of the repair is also internally committing to try not to make this mistake again. When you think about it, can you think about situations where you've been hurt by someone and they apologize, but then they just do it again the next day? The apology doesn't feel real or valid or worth anything. It's easy to just say sorry. It takes more work to acknowledge your mistake, offer a repair, and then make the internal commitment to not make that mistake again. And this seems kind of obvious, but I'll say it anyways. A repair does not mean, oh, I gave them cookies and said I was sorry, so therefore I can be late again. That's not a helpful way of thinking about a repair. When we think about a repair, the commitment internally is, I am going to work to make sure that I don't do this again. A little side note is a topic that I've been interested in lately has been this concept of restorative justice. And this is a little bit of a tangent, but I'm going to tell you about it anyways in case some of you have heard about it or also share an interest. In the United States, when people do bad things, when people do illegal things, they go to jail. And jail is considered a punishment. The theory or the hope is that when you go to jail and it's so painful and unpleasant, and then you get out of jail, that you'll say, wow, I don't ever want to do that again. That was really shitty. But unfortunately, the research does not support that. We have individuals that continually go in and out of prison for much of their lives. Punishment as the only consequence is rarely effective. Restorative justice is this concept that other countries I know are working on programs around. This is the idea that you can do a bad thing, you can commit a crime, but the overall goal is not to punish them for having committed the crime. It's to help them understand the impact that their crime had on others. Restorative. So it's much more about education, treating, trying to develop empathy in people, which if you're not a psychopath, it actually is possible to help promote feelings of appropriate guilt, and then teach the offender ways that they can make repairs for the damage that they have done. So there's a lot of information and data and research on this field, but I thought I would just drop that in as we're talking about this idea of inappropriate and appropriate guilt. So the next thing is, how do you overcome inappropriate guilt? This is a little bit harder. So think about my client, Sarah, who was the people pleaser and always helping and taking care of others. When Sarah takes care of herself, she feels guilt, and this is inappropriate guilt. To overcome this, we actually have to keep repeating the offending behavior. I put offending in quotes. So if Sarah feels guilty about taking care of herself, then Sarah's job is to keep taking care of herself over and over and over. It's kind of a form of exposure therapy. The more Sarah practices taking care of herself and tolerating that inappropriate guilt, she actually gets better and better or more skillful at managing those feelings, and those feelings go down. And I really want to acknowledge that this is not easy work, especially in the beginning when Sarah first is learning how to take care of herself. That in and of itself was a lot of work because Sarah didn't even know what that meant or what that looked like to take care of yourself. We also worked on establishing boundaries, saying no. Just because someone asks you a favor doesn't mean you have to say yes. And that was huge for Sarah to recognize, yeah, I'm allowed to say no. I'm allowed to say, I'm sorry, but I'm not able to help you with that. And doing that was mind-blowing and terrifying and created so much inappropriate guilt. But over time, as she slowly practiced saying no over and over and over, it got easier. Will Sarah struggle indefinitely with twinges of inappropriate guilt? Maybe. It's possible. But she has learned that self-care and boundaries has been huge, and she is now able to do it and to tolerate the mild inappropriate guilt that she feels when she does it. Now let's shift gears a little bit and talk about shame. As I said before, a lot of times people use guilt and shame interchangeably. Shame is the emotion that we feel when we feel we are wrong, we are bad, we are not okay. On a side note, if you've ever heard that song by Jelly Roll, I Am Not Okay, such a good song. You need to go check that out. So shame is, I am not okay. Something is wrong with me. How do we acquire chronic shame? Usually it's because in our earlier years, someone has shamed us, given messages to us that we are wrong. This could be our parents, but it also could be teachers or coaches, even our own peers. People in the environment have told us repeatedly that something's wrong with us. Let's give an example. Imagine that your teenager's room is a complete and total disaster. A shame-based way of parenting that teenager is to say, what is wrong with you? You're such a lazy slob. I can't believe you live this way. You're suggesting or implying to the teenager that something is wrong with them because their room is messy. A non-shame-based parenting strategy is to just acknowledge, hey, kid, your room's a mess. I'd like you to please clean that up. So there's no implication. There's no even straight out saying there's something wrong with you for having a messy room. You're just saying, I don't like the mess in my house. I'd like you to please clean that up. When parents repeatedly, or not just parents, as I said, coaches, teachers, anybody, but oftentimes the folks that I work with, it is their parents. But when we grow up in a very shame-based environment, we're going to internalize those messages. I know for myself, I have struggled with chronic shame, less so because of any shame-based parenting that I received, and more about actually peers. I was bullied a lot particularly in elementary school. And I got a lot of negative messages that something was really, really wrong with me, that I was a loser, that I was ugly, and all these horrible things. And unfortunately, I internalized all of those messages. And so I notice that I'm sensitive to feeling shame. And over the course of my therapy, because my therapy is often very mindfulness based with somatic awareness or body awareness, what I've learned over the years is to respond to my shame with non-judgmental awareness and even a little self-compassion. So if something happens that triggers shame within me, I'm able to acknowledge, oh, I'm feeling this warmth in my face. I'm feeling a tightness in my head. I'm feeling this freeze response almost. That's unfortunately just old stuff that presents itself in my body when I'm feeling shame. What I have learned, however, is to notice these sensations. And sometimes when I'm really in a good headspace, I can even kind of be friendly with my shame. In my mind, I can say something like, oh, hey, shame. Hey, friend, haven't seen you in a little while. Good to see you. Let's just allow that shame to be present. And we're going to allow that emotion to begin and to peak and to end, as all emotions always do. So if you hear things in your head when you make a mistake, such as, oh my God, I'm so stupid. I can't believe I did that. What's wrong with me? I'm such a loser. Those are internalized shame-based messages that you have received somewhere along your life. You have internalized those messages so that now you don't even have to hear them outside, you hear them inside. It's very important to work on chronic feelings of shame. When left untreated or unacknowledged, shame can spiral. We can get into this shame cycle where we get mad at ourselves for feeling ashamed. What is wrong with me that I'm feeling this way? I'm such a loser that I keep feeling this sense of shame. So it's this compounding spiral that can be really, really challenging to get out of. And when we're in that spiral, we can either lash out at other people, the people who we feel have shamed us, or we can lash out at ourselves and just continue that spiral. And I've seen folks do that for days or weeks at a time. And shaming your shame never helps. Trust me, it only makes it worse. So the next time that you feel shame arising, see if you can slow it down. That's the key to mindfulness, is learning how to slow it down. See if you can notice, where are you feeling the shame in your body? Do you feel it in your head and your cheeks the way I do? Maybe you feel it in your throat or your chest or your belly. Somewhere in your body, you are experiencing the sensations of shame. And see if you can just notice it. Notice it without judgment. Be that scientist of just being aware. Oh, this is what shame feels like in my body. Just that, in and of itself, noticing and acknowledging without judgment the physical sensations of shame, that's huge. So as we slow this down, see if we can be gentle with our shame. We can do that. Oh, hello, shame. Nice to see you. Haven't seen you in a little bit. You can do that. If you don't feel like you can do that, just breathe. Just allow that feeling to begin to peak and to pass. If we step out of the way If we don't shame the shame, if we don't get angry at the shame or anxious about the shame, if we just let the shame be, I promise you, it will pass on its own. In addition to noticing the physical sensations of shame, there's almost always thoughts. So the thoughts of, I'm bad, I'm not enough, I'm not worthy. And the challenging part of mindfulness of thoughts is not getting attached to them. Just notice the thoughts. Notice those sentences going through your head, like clouds in the sky or leaves on the stream, whatever visual image that helps for you. The goal is not to get attached to the thoughts. Don't grab onto them. Try not to spin them. Just let the thoughts pass, reminding yourself that a vast majority of the thoughts that we have are just not true. They're just thoughts. They're just sentences that are going through our mind, and we don't have to believe them. Now, as always, I would love to hear from you. Have you ever struggled with excessive guilt or trying to understand the difference between appropriate guilt or inappropriate guilt? Have you found any strategies that help you with the inappropriate guilt? And I would love to hear. Put some comments in the comment section, or you can also reach out to me at Dr. Lori at drloribruce.com. I want you to know how much I appreciate every single one of you who's following me and listening to these episodes. I'm very grateful for every single one of you, and I hope that you found a little nugget in today's episode that has been helpful for you. As always, I hope you have a fantastic week, and I'll see you in the next episode.